It is August 23rd, 2016. This is the Watchman News, and I'm Mike Callahan. We've been watching steps in every single direction unfold to make this a one world government, a one world religion, one world currency, I think is what we're watching happening right in front of our own eyes right now. Well, we're seeing all of it right now. And it would seem that the EU president has pretty much came out and said it. You know, they just do it in kind of a nonchalant way, to where people don't, a lot of people anyway, they don't catch on to what they're really saying. They're not saying we want a one world government. Instead, they're saying things like this: borders are the worst invention ever made by politicians. This is on Zero Hedge. I'll put the link in the description tab. It reads as, if the British needed any more confirmation of their decision to lead the EU, Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, just gave them a big one. The often incoherent, when it's important you have to lie politician spewed more United States of Europe tripe this morning when he called for European nations to drop border controls, claiming that borders were the worst invention ever. Britain's new PM, Theresa May, was not amused. Speaking at the European Forum Outbach in Austria's Tyrol, Mr. Juncker said borders are the worst invention ever made by politicians, and said solidarity must be given to refugees and their children. Border bullshit starts at 10:15. Note the mindless applause from the audience when Juncker drops his line. There's a video there, you can play it if you'd like. Mr. Juncker's comments were taken as a sign that he intends to block attempts to tighten border checks to deal with the migrant crisis overwhelming Europe. It is also a challenge to France and Belgium, who have pushed for an end to the Schengen free movement zone across the EU to stop terrorists crossing the continent without checks after Europe was rocked by a series of atrocities. The intervention from Mr. Juncker came from Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel, French President Francois Hollande, that's probably Francois, I think, and Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi met on the Italian island of Ventotene. Yeah, I'm no good with these names, folks. The concept of the EU was the first dreamt up to discuss the impact of Brexit. That's interesting. The latest views of Mr. Juncker, who also says the EU needs to block popular nationalism in response to Brexit, were immediately disagreed by Theresa May. Britain's new Prime Minister, Theresa May, was not impressed by Juncker's de-sovereignization rhetoric. This is not something that the Prime Minister would agree with, and indeed, you have heard the Prime Minister talk about the views that the British people expressed in the referendum. The British people think that borders are important, having more control over our borders is important, and that is an issue we need to address. And surprisingly, UKIP spokesman Peter Whittle said that Juncker's comments were beyond parody. This was another reason why we must exit the EU as quickly as possible, otherwise our security could be left, I guess that's exposed. Yeah, I've got a line on my screen, sorry. Exposed by Juncker's anti-border policy. Safe and secure borders help to define a nation. You only have to look at Germany to see what happens when you effectively discard them. Mr. Juncker is also well behind the curve to think he or his colleagues amongst the European political elite can stop popular democracy from flourishing across Europe following the historic Brexit vote. Sorry, my microphone's kind of in the way now. I'm happy to predict that Britain will not be the only country to leave the EU and become a free and sovereign nation again, added UKIP's national culture spokesman. The big question is, of course, what will George Soros demand of Juncker next? So see, I've been sitting there trying to figure all this out with this whole Brexit thing. Because believe me, I'm sure it goes way deeper than what we've been told. As I've said many times before, you have a lot of bigwigs now. There's a lot of infighting going on from people that were completely convinced they were in the club and are quickly finding out they're not. So you're going to see a lot of this stuff happening. I still don't know whether the Brexit was a good or a bad thing yet. I don't know. They have such a good way of making something very, very horrendous look like a rose. We'll see.